Beit HaMikdash, Yitziya Demale, Beit HaMikdash, Yitziya Demale, V'shalom Shir Shirodosh, U'benanale, V'shalom Shir Shirodosh, U'benanale, Beit HaMikdash, Yitziya Demale, Beit HaMikdash, Yitziya Demale, V'shalom Shir Shirodosh, U'benanale, V'shalom Shir Shirodosh, U'benanale. Now, one more version. Here we go. One more version. Here we go. Aha. Okay. I had it set up a little differently, so we'll do it that way. I'm sorry, just a moment. There we go.
Beit HaMikdash, Zion, Zion, Zion Demale, ושנה שיר שיר חדש, ומרנננלה, ושנה שיר שיר חדש, ומרנננלה, ציון, ציון, בית HaMikdash, Zion, Zion. אוי, ושנה שיר שיר חדש, ומרנננלה, ושנה שיר שיר חדש, ומרנננלה, let's go! Zion, Zion, Zion Demale, Beit HaMikdash, Zion, Zion, Zion Demale, ושנה שיר שיר חדש, ומרנננלה, ושנה שיר שיר חדש, ומרנננלה.
Well, let's get into learning now. Thanks very much for being that part of it. And I think we just found four guys next year for the Major League Baseball Home Run Derby. I think we found four guys who can sing the national anthem, for those of you that have been following that story. The lady who sang the national anthem today publicly addressed the disaster of last night and admitted that she's an alcoholic and is going into rehab. And it's a shame that it took embarrassing herself for all time to come in front of like 100 million Americans, but it shows the dangers of addiction. And if you know anybody who has an addiction problem, it is so important to help out, whether to convince them to go into rehab, to find a way to get that message, whether it's alcohol or a drug or gambling, any of these addictions, other kinds of addictions. Sometimes people see it and they walk away and they say, poor guy, poor woman, she drinks too much. It would be very important to figure out a way to help people. It's awkward. How do you go to a person and just say, you're an alcoholic? And so it's sensitive. You have to go to family, and very often they have to confront the person, and it doesn't always work. But this is the result otherwise. You have a girl, she gets herself a big reputation. She starts drinking. becomes a drunk. Next thing you know, she makes almost a career-ending failure. Americans are very willing to forgive if she cleans up her act, but it's a very important thing. It can hit anybody. It could even hit Orthodox Jews. I've known Orthodox Jews with every one of those kinds of issues. In fact, it's one of the reasons that I've always been an extremist against synagogue casino nights, Las Vegas nights, as a way to earn money for the temple or synagogue. They'll bring in a company that specializes in setting up in the main hall of the synagogue, or the main lobby or whatever, like a Las Vegas casino operation. And the deal is that all the monies that are won go to the shul. So people are not gambling to make money, but the shul gets the money, really like the Las Vegas hotels. And I actually know of at least 2 cases of people who became lifelong gambling addicts, having first begun at a synagogue Las Vegas night. And it just set off an energy inside of them and a rush that they had to do it again. And the synagogue would not be doing it again for another year. So they went to Las Vegas, and I know 2 people like that. And one of them became such a bad addict, destroyed everything, destroyed his life, destroyed it really just beyond imagination, destroyed his career, ended up gambling away all his money, and then couldn't stop. And he eventually gambled away like $600,000 of equity he had in his house. Just horrible. And it started with a shul Las Vegas night. So I'm very anti that as well. And when I went to one shul where I was against it, and the board of directors told me we're going to do it anyway, and I left that shul. Doesn't work that way with me, and it's very important to know. Okay, if you're wondering how we got into that, I was playing Shlomo Carlebach, and Beit HaMIkdash commented on the national anthem disaster last night, commented that she's an alcoholic, admits it, and that took me off into that. Very important. Here we go. So we're in chapter 7. Let's take this off the screen. In fact, now that we're done with the songs, let me take off the optimizing for music, which creates more squares for video. Okay, and now let's go back on. Here we go. We still may have squares, but there should be fewer of the disruptive ones. Here we go. Perek Zion, chapter 7. King David now is at peace. He's been fighting wars with the Philistines, and those wars are done. They still exist. They haven't been utterly eradicated, but they are not in a fighting mood and won't be for a long, long time. He now is at peace. He's sitting in his house, his palace. From the word menucha, Noach, in the sense of, not Noah, but the sense of rest. God gave him rest, misaviv, all around him. Nowadays, tragically, you look at Israel, all around them, there's trouble. In the north, there's Syria and there's Lebanon. In the east, there's the so-called Palestine Authority. There are no Palestinians. There is no, but whatever that is. And then in the south, there is Hamas in Gaza. It's just the opposite of what David had. Everywhere he looked, there was peace. Everybody was basically spent and exhausted from trying to war against Israel, seeing that they couldn't do it. Sort of like what happened with Egypt after the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War, and they were all too happy to get back to Sinai, and they didn't want any more wars. And the same thing with Jordan. After the Six-Day War, they didn't want any more of it. Mikol Yeva, from all enemies, David is at peace. Well, so what do you do with peace? He could just spend his time now, the way a lot of kings are. They have a lot of money, no problems, and they just live a materialistic life. Not David. His mind immediately goes to ruach, spirituality, ruchniut. Ruchniut or ruchnius versus gashmius or gashmiut. His focus is on spirituality, not on material splendor. Yes, he's a king, and he has a beautiful house, a palace, of course. And he has many wives. But his focus is on serving God. Vayomer melech el Natan Navi. So the king says to the prophet Natan, we said that that's the next great prophet among the Jews after the passing of Shmuel Hanavi, Samuel. Re'ena, anochi yoshev bevet arazim. He says to the prophet, take a look at this. I don't know, take a look at this. I am sitting in an extraordinary Malibu, Beverly Hills, Laguna Niguel mansion. I can't believe the kind of home I'm living in. Beit Arazim, a house built out of cedar wood. We don't even have cedars. And yet I have imported cedar wood that King Hiram of Tyre sent my way. I have the most magnificent palace in the world. I don't know whether cedar, C-E-D-A-R, strikes you now, how it strikes you compared to gold or marble. At that time, the idea of having a cedar-based palace, extraordinary. Here I am, sitting in royalty beyond anyone's imagination. And meanwhile, the Aron Elokim Yoshev B'toch HaYiriyah. In the meantime, God's Ark of the Covenant is sitting under fabric. What does that mean? This is the Ark of the Covenant. Let's make it a little bigger. Okay. So this is the Ark. This is the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Tabernacle, not just the Ark. The Ark is inside with all the rest that's inside. And this is what the Mishkan, the tabernacle, looked like. It did not have a firm, solid roof, ceiling, the way you're experiencing your home. Rather, it was different skins. Skin of a ram, it was dyed red, skin of a goat, and there's some linen. But while it is a very proper house, quotation marks, for God, because it's exactly what God commanded. This is the architecture that God commanded of Betzalel back in the Torah when they built the Mishkan in Parshiot like Truman and Vayakhel. So on the one hand, it's God's house, but that was the house in the desert. And then when they came into Eretz Yisrael, the Aron Brit Hashem. So what happened? The Aron Brit Hashem, for a while, and for 369 years, it was in Shiloh, in Samaria, northern part of Judea, of what they call the West Bank. And then it moved to the city of Nov, like outside Nov, actually. It was the city of the Kohanim. It ended up in Givon, and it had like 3 places that it went. And then finally, now it's on the move. And David says, this is really not right. I'm living in this extraordinary mansion, and the Aron Elokim is sitting under skins and curtains. It's time to give God a proper house. And Natan the prophet said, hey, whatever is in your heart to do it. Now, you'll remember from last week's class, we learned that there's this, we didn't know this till last week. We learned that when a prophet speaks, it's important to know, is the prophet speaking by God's command, prophecy, or is the prophet talking like what makes sense? And I gave the example, if the prophet walks outside with his friend and they look at the sky and it looks cloudy and the prophet says, I think it's going to get sunny today. You don't run home and say, Natan the Navi said it's going to be sunny. It might still end up cloudy because it's not a nevuah. It's not a message from God. And so we still accept the words of wisdom from a wise person. If a person says, this is what I think, and you know it's a wise person, but there are no guarantees, right? You go to a person who's an incredible investment broker, like among the best brokers, and tells you, I think that stock XYZ is going to be going up over the next year, and I recommend you put some money into it. And you put some money into it, and it really shoots up. So that wasn't the prophecy from God. This guy knows his stuff. Or how's about you put that same money in on his same say-so, and then it turns out the company goes under. How did he make such a mistake? Well, he's knowledgeable, but he doesn't know everything. And that's why they always warn you, don't, we're not making you promises. And so Natan Hanavi here is not speaking from God's prophecy. His gut is the following. I'm a wise man. He's humble. He's not saying to himself, I'm a wise man. But I'm a wise man. And I see God is protecting David, anointed David. And I see David's gone to battle. In every battle, David has won. And when God has told him, wait till the last moment before you strike, even though it feels scary because the other side is about to kill you, and yet you're saying until we hear the rustling of the leaves in the tree, we're not fighting. And he honors God's command, and he wins. He wins everything there. And he's got a nice growing family, lots of wives, lots of children. He's wealthy. And he's knocked out the Jebusites, the Yevusim, and he's now taken Yerushalayim. And by God's, not that we're happy about it, but Ishbosheth, his main opposition, was assassinated. And everything's gone his way. It is my impression Natan is thinking to himself, if you want to build a Beit HaMikdash, go ahead and do it. You're the man. And that's just his gut reaction. And it's a good reaction. And it's the way a religious person, like, how do you know? If you don't ask God, how do you know? Right now, people talk about what happened on Shabbat when that jerk shot at at 45th President Trump. Let's bring this person. And missed Trump by an inch or a millimeter. And there are those who say, oh boy, is he lucky. And there are those who say, it's the hand of God. We don't know. There's part of me that wants to say it's the hand of God. Well, everything is from God. But sometimes God hides his face. I don't know. I heard someone say it's from the hand of God. One of the commentators say it was the hand of God because Trump took such and such a policy. Or it's the hand of God because someone else said, we pray for Trump every day in our church, and all those accumulated prayers, that's what saved him. And if you wanted to push me hard enough, I would say, I don't know. But if it's related to anything, maybe it's related to the idea that he's the one who moved the embassy to Jerusalem, recognized Jerusalem as eternal capital of the Jewish people, recognized the legality of Jewish communities in Judea, Samaria, recognized the Golan Heights sovereignty there, kicked out the Palestine Authority from Washington, D.C., cut out the Human Rights Council, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe that's it. I don't know. But none of us really knows. We don't know. Here, Natan does not know. He's not making a prophecy, but it seems as though he is. Let's see where this is taking us. So he says, Vayomer Natan el HaMelech. So Natan says in Pasuk Gimel, verse 3, Kol asher b'lvavcha lech aseh. Whatever's in your heart to do, go for it. Ki Hashem imach, because God is with you. So go ahead and build it. And God immediately rushes that night to communicate to Natan in a dream. Let me just remind you, some of us may know some of this and may not immediately come to mind. At the Seder, at the end of one of the two Seder nights, there's a small song or poem at the very end, right before the fun songs, like Who Knows One, Echad Mi Yodea, and Dirhu, and Chad Gadya. There's something called Vayehi B'Chatzi Halayla. And most people either don't say it or they race through it. And it basically, if you look at it very carefully, because the Hebrew's a little bit poetic and therefore a little harder to understand. It essentially is a recounting of all the miracles in Judaism that are documented in the Torah and the Bible and in the Navi, in the prophets, in which God came in the middle of the night. That's like God's thing, is to make things happen in the middle of the night. A couple of them, just to give you a quick example. He came to Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov went to sleep in the middle of the night and had that dream of the ladder with the angels going up and the angels coming down. And God tells him, this land I will be with you as you go, and I'll be with you when you come back, and your children will have this. It happened in the middle of the night. Okay. It happened in the middle of the night that he came and he smote the Egyptians with the 10th plague. That happened in the middle of the night. In the middle of the night, Achashverosh, the king, couldn't sleep in the book of Megillah Esther. And in the middle of the night, so he asked somebody to pull his chronicles, read it to him. Haman shows up, yada, 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 turns the whole story around. In the middle of the night. When Yaakov had fled, had left his parents Yitzchak and Rivka, and fled before his brother Esav killed him, murdered him, he fled to Lavan, his uncle, the brother of his mother, Rivka, and also became his father-in-law times two once he married Leah and Rachel. And then when Yaakov fled from the home of Lavan after 20 years, Lavan pursued him to kill him. And shortly before catching up with him, Yaakov got a big head start, but Lavan was faster. Yaakov had 12 little children with him. God came to Lavan in the middle of the night and said to him, you better not touch this man or you'll be dead. Said, put him under control. We recently, once or twice, have learned the story of how when Abraham and Sarah were traveling through the Gaza area, Avimelech, the king, took Sarah into his palace and was going to do something forbidden, and God came to him in the middle of the night. So these are some examples. It's all in that long poem. In the Haggadah, next year, if Mashiach hasn't come yet, go ahead and take a look. Right before you get to Chad Gadya, right around Dirhu, Chad Gadya, Achad Miodea, that poem, Vayehi B'chatzi Halayla. And it was in the middle of the night. And that's what happens here. God comes to Natan in the middle of the night. If we have time to learn in the text the commentary on it, they explain that God rushed, so to speak, to be there immediately that day in the middle of the night. Look, God could be anywhere in a second. God is already omnipresent. He's everywhere anyway. But to come to the prophet in a dream, which is the way that prophet received the message. So the point is that God raced and did it the first possible night. Commentators ask, what's the rush? God was concerned, since his plan was that David will not build the Beit HaMikdash. Rather, David's son Shlomo will build the Beit HaMikdash. God did not want, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not want that David, having been told by Natan to build the Beit HaMikdash, if you like, that now David might make a neder, make an oath, a vow. You know, you can't violate it, a neder, a vow. It's one of the 10 pronouncements, the 10 commandments. To take God's name in vain, you make a vow or an oath. You gotta stand by that oath or vow. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God was concerned that when David got that message from Natan, he might be so excited that he will be the one to build the Beit HaMikdash, that he might make a vow that he will not eat a morsel of food, nor drink a drop of anything until he starts building the Beit HaMikdash. Obviously, he's not going to say, I won't eat or drink till I finish building the Beit HaMikdash. That's obviously going to take some time. But he might make a vow, I am so, this reason makdimin lemitzvot, that when you have a chance to do a great mitzvah, you do it right away, you don't procrastinate. That he might say, tomorrow morning, first thing, I'm going to start, and to keep me on track, I won't eat or drink till I start building the Beit HaMikdash. And since it will not be his destiny, God knows, to build the Beit HaMikdash, if he's made such an oath, I'm not going to eat or drink till I start building it, and he doesn't know it, but he's never going to start building it, Not a good thing. Also, he might have other things he's planning to do as part. He might conscript 10,000 people from their homes to the royal whatever workforce to build the Beit HaMikdash. And since he's not going to be building the Beit HaMikdash, leave these 10,000 people alone. So God wanted immediately to stop this mistake from going any further. Let's continue. So Kadosh Baruch Hu comes by Yehi B'layla Hahu. Kadosh Baruch Hu comes that night to Natan. And again, the way so you ask yourself, I've discussed this in the past, you ask yourself, how do you know, like you have dreams, I have dreams. How do you know when you dream that God's talking to you? I've never had a dream God talking to me. But how do you know if you're having a dream God talking to you, it's God talking to you and not just some dream? And the answer is that it's a uniquely vivid dream. And I've shared with you that I had the only time in my life, twice actually related, when I was at the hospital getting my lung transplant. They had me on such incredibly intensive I want to say medications that make you hallucinate. They had me on such strong stuff that Denise was in the room with me for 4 months. Denise stayed in the hospital with me. It's amazing. She's an amazing, amazing person, amazing wife. And all she remembered I was talking, like if you're with somebody who's having a dream, a good one, a bad one, and you might hear some mumbling. But she heard atypically from me. I was having real articulated conversations both ways. And there's a lot of stuff that happened in those like 4 or 5 days that I had 4 or 5 days of dream. That I've never had anything like that, except when I had to go back April this month. I had that surgery, and they put me on something for like 3 days. Yeah, unbelievable. I literally did not know I'm dreaming. I literally was more than sleepwalking. The only reason I wasn't sleepwalking is I couldn't move because of the surgery. But I was having an argument and a conversation, and it was like real. And that's what the Navi are going through. They're having, without taking hydrocodone or Norco or fentanyl, God forbid, they're experiencing an out of body experience. And that's how they know they're being spoken to by God. And it's sort of like when it happens, and you're that one in a generation who's been told it's going to be you. With Shmuel, it's Natan. So Kadosh Baruch Hu comes to him in the middle of the night and says to him, Vayehi davar Hashem el Natan, God speaks to Nathan, Lech v'amarta el avdi el David. I want you to go and tell my servant David, there's no greater honor than for God to call you his servant. Called Joshua, his servant. Called Moshe, his Eved Ne'aman, his faithful servant. There's no greater honor than to be the servant of God. I want you to go and tell my servant David, Ko Amar Hashem, thus says God. Are you the one who's going to build the house for me, Lashevet, for the purpose of dwelling in it, like a yishuv? Kilo yashavti b'vayit lemin ha'aloti b'nei Yisrael mi'Mitzrayim, because after all, I have not dwelled in a house from the day I took the Jewish people out of Egypt. But hayom hazeh, to this very day, I have not dwelt in a house. Instead, I've been wandering in a tent, the tent of meeting, the Oel Moed, and the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and it's been going from this place to that place. It first came into Arutz Yisrael, the land of Israel, with Joshua. Then it moved to Shiloh for 369 years. Then it moved again, and it moved again. Constantly. Through all these places that I've brought the Jews, leading the Jews 40 years in the desert into the land of Israel, I've said that's Shetziviti Lerot Tami at Yisrael more as I've been like a shepherd, shepherding the Jews. Lama lo v'nitem li beit arazim. And I've been saying, why have you yet still not built for me a house of cedar? Ba'ata with an ayin. And now, kotamar li avdil David. Nathan, Natan, I want you to immediately tell my servant David, Komar Shem Tzvakot. This is what God came to me, Nathan, the Lord of hosts, and told me, Ani lekachticha min hanaveh. I, God, that is, Natan is telling David, that God said, I, God, brought you, David, took you, David, from the pastures where you were shepherding sheep. Me achar hatzon, I took you from the sheep, and Shmuel was sent to your household, the house of Jesse, Yishai, to anoint the next king of Israel, and he went one by one till I guided him to do it for you. Liot Nagid, to be the leader of the Jews, Alamil Yisrael. So I selected you. And I have been with you everywhere you've gone. Some of it's been very hard. He's been avoiding and evading King Saul, and he's been on the run, and he's had to be on the run from the Philistines, and he's been on the run from all kinds of peoples. But God's always been with him, even when it took miracles. You may remember the story of the spider web. He's hiding in a cave, and Saul comes to the cave, not knowing David's in it, but to relieve himself. They didn't have bathrooms, and he went to relieve himself in a cave in a very honorable way, not just in public. He's king of Israel, and he would have been inclined also to go deeper into the cave as they were looking for David. But he saw a spider web fully intact and inferred no way David could have been inside that cave. He couldn't be there more than an hour. A spider wouldn't have built a web like that in an hour. It was God's miracle sending that spider. I've been with you everywhere you've gone. When they brought you before the king, when you were on one time you were on the run, and then they brought you before the king, and we got David, the guy who killed Goliath. And I placed in your mind the idea of acting like a maniac, drooling at the mouth and dribbling and acting crazy. And the king was persuaded that you're insane. And so he let you go instead of executing you. I've been there for you all the time. So I'm with you. And I have cut off every one of your enemies from before you. And I have and will continue to make of you the greatest name, a name that will be greater than any other name in the world, of the most famous people. And that's true. You go to people now in the year 2024, 5784, you mention King David of Israel. People have heard of him. By contrast, you can mention other kings from that time. King Hiram. Maybe they've heard of Hiram Walker or Hiram, whatever, the whiskey company. Who's heard of the great people? Nobody's heard of them anymore. David is remembered for all time. And indeed, God says, I will establish a place for my nation Israel. I brought that to the land of Israel, and I have planted the people here in this land, and I shall dwell among them. And the nation will no longer be bothered here. And bad guys, nations of bad people, will no longer bother you in your lifetime. And it's been ever since I brought judges into the land. Judges like Gideon, Gidon, Yiftach, Shimshon, Samson, Devorah, Deborah, the great judges of Israel, Ehud, V'gid lecha Hashem ki vayit yaseh lecha Hashem. And you've known that that it's the time to have the house of God. here's the thing. Ki yimlu yamecha. This is still Nathan talking to David from God's words. So God said to me, says Nathan, to David, God's finishing up now and saying, when your days are over, when you have Maleus complete, full, when your days are completed, as we will later learn, that's going to be when he's going to die at age 70. And you will be laid to rest with your fathers. I shall raise up your seed, your children after you. Children who will come from your loins. In other words, you'll be the father. You have fathered the child. And I shall make that son's kingship throne. I will establish his reign. Hu yivneh bayit lishmi, and he will be the one who builds the house in my honor, in my name. V'chonanti et kisei mamlachto ad olam, and I will establish his royal kingship, monarchy, and family and dynasty for all time. So that Mashiach, Messiah, will come not only from David, but from Solomon. Ani ehyalo la'av, I will be his father. V'yali leven, and he will be my son. Asher ba'avoto v'hochachti b'shevet anashim, there will be times that he sins, he's a person, and I will reprove him. I will let him hear it. But even if I punish him, b'shevet anashim u'v'nigei b'nei adam, even if I have to punish him that he gets hit, he gets struck physically, or he ends up being afflicted with an illness in punishment for something he should not have done. V'chasti lo yasor mimenu. Nevertheless, my foundational love for him and kindness for him will never part ways. Ka'asher hasiroti me'im Shaul. From King Saul, my special kindness and chesed did part ways. Not only did Saul's reign end, but I parted ways from the royal dynasty in the house of Benjamin. That shall not happen with the house of Yehuda, the house of David, the house of Solomon. I shall always be with you, even if I have to punish him. Asher hasiroti milfanecha. I will always be. B'ne'aman beitcha u'mamlechacha olam lefanecha. And your house, your royal dynastic house, will be firmly established. Ne'aman means faithful, and it also has the word amen in it. It will be sure. That's what amen means. When you hear a blessing, blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who made these vegetables. And someone says amen, person saying, absolutely, that's correct. That's exactly it. Blessed is God. When someone recites a prayer, praising God, and the congregation says, amen, they're saying, praise God. You said, praise God. We are reaffirming the same. Amen. So his kingship, his throne will be affirmed for all time. And that entire prophecy that came to Nathan in the middle of the night, he then went to David and conveyed the prophecy. So let's start learning some commentary. What we've learned here in the 17 psukim, in this 28 verse chapter, is that David was at peace, and the first thing crossing his mind was not, let's go to the movies, and let's go to the theater, and let's go to the best restaurant in town. His first thought obviously those are anachronisms, but the first thought in his mind is, I'm not going to rest till I build a house of God. I've been waiting to do that all this time. It's like, I will tell you, I don't want to go into detail on this. Something happened where a little bit of money came my way. The first thing I did was I started giving tzedakah. There were certain people I had wished I could give. I used to say to myself, I wish I were as rich as certain people. There are certain, I'd like to give a little tzedakah. And when somebody, the first thing that went through my mind is not, I'm taking out a subscription to the Amundsen Theater, which is the California equivalent of Broadway. Or the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a great store and buy some really great clothing. And I'm not making myself a tzaddik. Don't get me wrong. I would like to think that almost anybody would do that. The first thought for a religious Jew would be, what's a mitzvah you've always wanted to do but couldn't quite afford it? And that's what I did. And so in the same way, I'll tell you more. I mean, I wanted to upgrade my, some people don't even hold by it, but I wanted to upgrade my talis to have techelet, blue string. Some people aren't into that. I upgraded my talis, I upgraded my tzitziot, several pairs. I wanted a talis. I wanted it, not everybody's into that. I wanted to put one of those silver turret things on it. That's the first thing I did. And I'm not making of myself a tzaddik. But that's the first thing that went through my mind. And I did it. And I believe a lot of people do that. And this is how David's mind worked. So we learned that he's finally got peace. He wants to build a house to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He mentions it. God comes and says, I've been waiting for this all this time. David says to Natan, what do you think? Natan says, go for it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu races in the middle of the night to let Natan know, wait a second, wait a minute. We're not doing that so fast. He's not the one. I want you to tell him this prophecy. He's not going to be the one. His son will be the one. I've shared with you a little bit of insight, a head start on some of the commentators. To give you a real quick head start one more time, number one, some of the things I've mentioned, we'll see it in the commentary, and some of what's going on here. I told you in the past, David had shed blood in his life, killed Goliath, killed Philistines, and God wanted the symbolism that whoever builds the Beit HaMikdash not have had shed blood, even though it was righteous shedding of blood. Secondly, there's an alternative opinion that says that if David had built the Beit HaMikdash, God never could have destroyed it. He would never have destroyed something David built. And God knew that there will come times in history that the nation will sin, God forbid, so intensely that he's going to take down the Beit HaMikdash. So he didn't want David to build it. There's a third thing, and now we're going to go into the commentary text itself. It's a third interesting idea I'd never heard before till I started preparing class. There was an opinion, God wanted the Beit HaMikdash to be built by a dynastic house. That he wanted the monarchy already to be dynastic, not just a first-time king like Saul, who was a king but was not able to really hand it down. You could say Ishbosheth inherited, but only he didn't get all 12 tribes. God wanted, according to that opinion, David's the first of the family, and when Solomon comes, it's now a dynasty. And therefore, Solomon, the dynastic king, can be the one to build the Beit HaMikdash. So those are some opinions. Let's get in. I saw there's at least one hand up, and I promise at the end of class to take the question. Let's take some quick look at some of these things. Here we go. By the way, it reminds me, I want very much to thank, I believe it was Francis. Last week, I got stuck on 2 or 3 words, and I just didn't remember the word at the time. What was that thing that you dole soup out with? And it was a ladle, absolutely. And I mentioned to Francis, I thanked her so much. She got that one. And then there was also that kind of dancing that Miley Cyrus did. And I don't remember what it's called twerking, God forbid. So anyway, that's that. Let's go forward. This is the Radak on the last verse of chapter 6. We talked about David and Michal did not have a child till her dying day. Michal bat Shaul lo hayala yaled ad yom mota. She did not have a child to the day she died. And the question is, what does that mean? Radak says, v'cholem u'cha'et mota b'shuak. Okay, it's a little grammar stuff. U'bidrash aval b'yom hamita hayala. In the Midrash, when it says she did not have a child to her dying day, in general, everyday talk, That implies she didn't have a child. But the Midrash is, why does it say until her dying day? Why not just say she didn't have a child, period? To teach us, Amru in the Midrash, they say, Ki shlosha nashim metu chayot, that 3 women in the Bible died while giving birth. Rachel, that's the famous one, in Bethlehem, just outside Bethlehem, when she gave birth to Binyamin. V'chaloto shel Eli, and Umichal bat Shaul, and our Michal here, the daughter of Shaul, that Midrash is that she gave birth on her dying day. The other way to say that is she died in childbirth. Next, it says in the book of Deuteronomy, Dvarim, in the Torah, like the question is, what's with David immediately turning to building a Beit HaMikdash as soon as he had peace? They learn it out from Devarim, Perek Yud Bet, chapter 12 of the book of Deuteronomy. God says, when you will be in the place, when you get to the place that the Lord God will select from among all the parcels of land distributed among all 12 tribes, and you'll get to that location where God has chosen to place his name, L'shichno, for the purpose of dwelling there. Tidrshu v'atashama, you'll come there, and va'avartem et hayarden, you will first, before you get there, you'll have to first, from the desert, cross the Jordan River, v'shavtem ba'aretz, and you'll be dwelling in all the other parts of the land as you drive out those other Canaanite nations. Asher Hashem Elokeichem manchil etchem, all those lands that God gives you as an inheritance, and the day will come that you have absolute peace from all your enemies. Misaviv, all around you. That's literally the text that we were just learning tonight, right? What did it say in the beginning? It said that as soon as he came, and it said, Heiniach lo misaviv mikol yavav. Heiniach lo, gave him peace all around from all of his enemies. So that's the wording. When the day comes in the Torah that you reach that moment in the land of Israel, still in the desert, that you have complete peace from all your enemies on all sides, at that moment, then you shall focus your attention on the location that God will select from among the whole territory of the land of Israel to be his place of dwelling. Shama taviyu et kol asher anochi mitzav etchem. There you shall bring the korbanot, the sacrifices, etc. And the question might be asked, so let me ask you, the question might be asked, why doesn't the Torah explicitly tell us in the 5 books, in Devarim, which city it's going to be? Why doesn't it say when you get to Jerusalem? Why does it say when you get to the place that God will select? Is it that God still didn't know where? Of course, God knew exactly where. And it's no coincidence that it's Mount Zion, because Mount Zion already had a history. There's an understanding, Mount Zion is also called Mount Moriah. That's where Abraham brought Yitzchak. Abraham brought Isaac up to the mountain and almost sacrificed him. That happened there. It's understood perhaps that Yaakov Avinu, when he was on his way to Lavan, when he was fleeing his parents' household to get away from his brother Esav, and he slept that night that he went to sleep, and he dreamt about the ladder going, with the angels going up and down. That was on Mount Zion. So we already had a history with Mount Zion as the holy mountain. So God knew. So the question is, why don't you just say it? Why does he keep them guessing and leaving it uncertain? The concern was exactly what we're living through today, that there will be enemies of the Jews, and as soon as they realize that the Jews intend to establish God Almighty's house on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, they will build a false house of their own there first to make it impossible for us to build there. It's exactly what's going on with that mosque that shouldn't be there. What in the whole world? That's why did they go there? Why did they put up? They do it everywhere. The Muslims have done it in Turkey. They've done it in Constantinople. They've done it everywhere. I go on and on. They've done it in India. They go to holy sites of other places, and when they conquer, they destroy the other place and they put up their own place, or they keep the other place up and they gut the inside and they turn it from a church into a mosque. And so it was God's intention that the nations not know where we're going. The Jews will find out when you need to, it's like you're driving the kids on vacation. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And you say, "Will you leave me alone? When we get there, we'll let you know we got there, okay? In the meantime, why don't you look for a Baskin Robbins? Okay, it's kosher. So we'll be driving next 37 hours, and the only kosher thing that's going to show up next 37 hours on the freeway or the highway is going to be Baskin Robbins. So stop asking me questions. Just keep your eyes open for Baskin Robbins, and we'll tell you when we get there." So that's it. God says you don't need to know. What's the difference? If it's going to be Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, it's going to be Ra'anana. I mean, Herzliya, there was no Herzl at the time. I mean, it wasn't the Tel Aviv either. You'll find out when you need to find out. But the idea is, well, we don't want to let the non-Jews know, because they will then start building mosques and all kinds of places of their own, Philistine temples and stuff like that. So anyway, Torah says that when you get to the land that God will select, namely Jerusalem, that's the place, as soon as he gives you peace. And so we continue with the commentary. Vayomer HaMelech el Natan. So then the next thing is that David said to Natan, "I'd like to build the house," right? King said, "Here I am dwelling in a house of cedar. Well, the ark of the Lord abides in a tent. I'd like to build it." So Darash, so then what did Natan say? So Natan said, "Go ahead and build it." Darash ben Navi, em yaskim Hashem l'zeh. Remember David's way. Remember how, unlike Shaul, how David always asked of the Urim and Tumim, always went to the high Kohen and asked to communicate, what does God say? Shall I go to war? Shall I not go to war? How shall I do this? In the same way, he goes to the prophet, the Navi, not for instructions, whether a guidance to go to war, but in peacetime, should I now begin building the house of God? He always asks for God's approval first. And while asking Natan, whether God will approve my building the house now, where exactly, I understand it's on the Mount Zion, but where exactly on this mountain should I build? So what ends up happening is that Natan spoke from svara, from his own common sense logic. And he felt it's what it seems to be. Radak continues that, let me just see. Okay, so Radak says, and Natan was talking, I want to say it very respectfully. We've learned a million times, you must always speak respectfully about giants. Torah giants should speak respectfully to everybody. I'm not always 100% successful myself, but I always try. And we all should always speak respectful to everybody. And when you're dealing with a rabbi and a prophet, you got to be over the top respectful. So I'm trying to say this respectfully about Natan, because I'm not even worthy of shining his shoes or sandals. But the commentator is saying that, look, as I taught you, when he talks without a prophecy from God, it's a problem. It could be he was thinking that, I guess so, but actually, a prophet does not know its exactitude and certainty other than what God tells him in prophecy. Because even the great prophet Samuel, Shmuel and Navi, he didn't know which son of Jesse, of Yishai, to anoint. If you remember way back when we were learning about Shmuel, and when he went to the house of Jesse by Yishai, and he knew he's supposed to anoint a son of Yishai, I don't know what you remember, but his immediate instinct was to go to the oldest tallest, most strapping, handsome young man among the brothers. He looks like a king. And God said, no, that's not the one. And then he inclined to the next one, and so on and so forth. And God kept saying, that's not the one, that's not the one. Shmuel, his instinct was wrong. Well, let's say it was not correct. Kigam Shmuel Hanavi, Shahaya Gadol Mimenu, Samuel the prophet was even greater than Natan. Shnamar Alav Kol Asher Yadaber Bo Yavo. He's citing how great he was. And nevertheless, Lo Yada Bivnei Yishai Mi Hamelach. He didn't know of his own accord which of Yishai's sons would be the king. V'chashav ki Eliyahu Hamelach. Kol Shekei Natan Navi. We'll do one or two more. We're a little bit past the time, so we'll do one or two more, and we'll break. I'll wrap it up, and I'll take the comments or questions. Okay. This is so nice that I think I want to say, okay, let's just, okay, we'll do this one. You know what? Let's do this one next week, because this is going to lead to some of these other ones, and it's such a nice discussion that we'll take that next week. It goes into the reasons, the sources for the reasons that I've been telling you that God did not have David build it, Beit HaMikdash, but instead his son, and it requires my bringing out a few other things. And if I do it now, I'll only be repeating it all over again. So the time is perfect to let go. I'm going to take comments and questions, but one quick thing. This Thursday, we will not meet. I'll tell you why. You could guess, but let me tell you. It was a great idea, and I'm glad that we did not miss a class simply for the debate. The debate was not urgent. It could wait, and you didn't miss a thing. Thursday night, after Trump speaks, I'm going to end up getting emails and calls and stuff from people who are going to want to talk to me about it. And if I first teach and Trump is going to be speaking like from 7 to 8 Pacific time, 10 to 11 Eastern time, and our class is 6:30 to 7:30. So I'll be contacting people from, I will not have yet have heard the speech, even though I'll have it taped. And then and it's like, you didn't listen to the speech and the whole thing. So anyway, we will not, I'll send out an email reminder. We won't meet this Thursday. By the way, this is not an endorsement of anyone. I'm also not going to meet the Thursday that Biden speaks, or whoever the Democrats end up choosing. So that's a story. Let's see what comments we have here. We have a question or two, and let's see what's in the chats. There's Tachash the Badger. I've heard several theories on Tachash. Indeed, I showed you a picture of the Mishkan. I don't want to call it a roof. We just said it's not a roof. But let's get this off the screen a second. Let's find that picture. There we go. So I showed you this picture of the Mishkan in the desert. And you see that there's the linen and the goat's hair and the ram skin and the badger. And indeed, the question is, in Hebrew, in the text, refers to Tachash. Yes, that would be the badger. And there are certain words in the Torah that we're not quite sure about how they translate, particularly nouns that refer to animals. I'll give you one more example of it. The law, and I'll keep this really short because I owe it to you. The laws of kashrut, the law of what fish are you allowed to eat and not allowed to eat? Very simple. It needs to have fins and scales, then it's kosher. If it does not have fins or it does not have scales, it's not kosher, end of story. And by the way, the scales have to be the kind of scales that you could rub off gently with your thumb without tearing the meat of the fish. So swordfish, which do have scales, but if you try to push it off with your thumb, it tears some of the fish meat as well. Swordfish is not kosher. There was a big debate in the 1950s between Orthodox Judaism and conservative Judaism over that, back in the days when conservative Judaism was close to being Judaism. Now conservative Judaism is off the rails. But back in those years, the big debate was swordfish, and mechitza, the partition during services separating men and women. And I remember at that time, I wrote a piece on behalf of an Orthodox argument that we don't eat swordfish, and they would go out of their way to eat swordfish to show. And I remember writing, "He who lives by the swordfish shall die by the swordfish." And that was when I started with that kind of stuff. Okay, next. The Torah on eating fish, very clear. 1, 2, 3. The Torah on eating animals, very simple. They have to chew their cud and have a split hoof. And the Torah names certain animals and goes into that. But it gives us a very clear rule. It has to have both a split hoof and chew its cud. End of story. The one that's curious is fowl, birds. The Torah does not have a rule. I don't know whether you noticed that. Torah does not have a rule on which birds are kosher and which fowl are not kosher. Okay, you're going to tell me, come on, Rabbi, I know chicken and duck and goose and that's kosher. There's one more, and bird, pigeon, dove, those are kosher, and not the others. Well, that's because you've inherited that and grown up with that. But what's the rule? And the rule is there is no rule. Rather, the Torah for that alone has a long list of birds that are not kosher. And if a bird is not on that list, it's kosher. It doesn't work like that with beef, with mammals. That's the rule. That's based on the rule. It doesn't work with that and with fish. It doesn't say don't eat lobster, don't eat shrimp. Rather, it says fins and scales. But on birds, it lists a long list of birds you're not allowed to eat. Everything else is kosher. Okay. So we know that a chicken is an oaf, and it's not on the list, it's kosher. We know that a dove is a Yonah. We know that because Noah sent a dove out of his ark. So we were introduced to that word already in Hebrew. So people trying to understand and specifically, what is this animal? What is that animal? What is this bird? What is this word? They know Yonah means dove. They know oaf means chicken. They know the word for like duck. Okay. They don't know most of those other words. We know orev, and orev is a crow. We know that Noah sent one of those out also. So that's listed as one of the forbidden birds. So we know you're not allowed to eat crow. You're not allowed to eat crow. I guess God blesses me every so often that I come up with one of those anyway. And there are some on that list, we know what they are because they show up in other ways. The crow, the raven shows up in that place and so on and so forth. But a lot of those we don't know. If you get, for example, the Sonsino Chumash translation, the one that's most used in more Orthodox synagogues than any other one, you will find where they translate those, as the translations, they just transliterate them. They just write the same, the Yamshuf and the Duchifat, they just write it Yamshuf, Y-A-N-S-H-U-F, Duchifat, D-U-C-H, they don't know what it is. We don't know what it is. Tachash, the one for which a skin of a tachash should be part of what covers the Mishkan tabernacle, we don't know what it is. Some say it's a badger, some say it's this, some say it's that, some say it's something that doesn't exist anymore, and we just don't know. Final word on that, and then any other questions, and then final word on that. Raises a very interesting question. I just taught you, if it's on the list, it's not kosher. If it's not on the list, it's kosher. So what do we do with turkey? Good question. We take for granted you eat turkey. Whoever heard of Empire Cult? If it's Empire Poultry, that's the end of the story, right? It's got an OU, right? What's the story? What's the question? Turkey's a big question. Because we know it's a form of chicken, but it's not a chicken. More than that. Who found out about it? Who ever heard of turkeys? Turkeys were when Columbus and all of those guys showed up in the New World and they met Pocahontas and all of those people. And they got introduced to turkey. And so until then, nobody ever heard of turkey in the Western world. Jews never heard of turkey. It's just the 1700s or 1600s, and they're coming to America. And there weren't any Orthodox Jews yet, but there were soon later. 1654, the SS St. Charles came with 23 Sephardic Jews who kept kosher, and they had no rabbi to inquire of. There were no rabbinic authorities. So they made a judgment call. They said the turkey looks like chicken, and it's probably kosher. So they started eating it. And then more Sephardic Jews came from South America as the Inquisition spread from Portugal and Spain. And then they came from Germany between 1840 and 1880, and most of the German Jews were Reformed Jews. They didn't keep kosher anyway. By the time the East European Jews came between 1881 and 1914, they saw that the Jews that do keep Shabbos and kosher eat turkey. So they started eating turkey, but certain rabbis said, maybe one of those listed birds that are forbidden, maybe one of them is the turkey. So there are Jews that to this day will not eat turkey because they're not sure. When the question was asked of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in the 1950s, it was asked of him in a different context. And with this, I'm closing. It was asked of him, are Orthodox Jews allowed to celebrate Thanksgiving? You may not realize it's a question, but according to Jewish law, we're not supposed to celebrate Christmas, Easter. Christians should have a wonderful celebration, but it's not our religion. It's not our holiday. So according to Jewish law, we're only supposed to celebrate our holidays, and they celebrate their holidays. So the question was, can you celebrate Thanksgiving? You are allowed to celebrate civil holidays that don't have any religious implication. Easter has a religious implication. Christmas is supposed to have a religious implication. And if I were Christian, I would be offended how commercialized and secular they've made Christmas. It's supposed to be a religious holiday. So the birth of Jesus and Easter when he rose in Christian theology. So, but a Jew in America, it's okay to celebrate the 4th of July, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, Columbus Day, Washington's birthday, Lincoln's birthday, whatever they've made out of those, Martin Luther King, Juneteenth. So the question becomes, they asked Rav Moshe, what about Thanksgiving? On the one hand, it's a civil holiday. Everybody in the country has turkey and they have cranberry sauce, yada, yada. But on the other hand, they're Thanksgiving, they're giving thanks. Who are they giving thanks to? Pocahontas? They're giving thanks to God by implication. And so Rav Moshe Poskin, very interestingly, he said there's certainly a good reason not for Jews not to celebrate Thanksgiving on the theory that it's a religious holiday. But there's certainly a very good basis for Jews to feel an imperative to celebrate Thanksgiving if your mind is that you're thanking God Almighty, the God of Israel, who founded it, who gave us a haven from what we went through in Europe, that he created a place in the world where Jews could have a haven and could flourish. And so we thank God Almighty for that. And so if you're going to eat turkey and everything, you could do it. And what he did was what we call in the law obiter dictum. Obiter dictum is when a case comes before the court, and while the court is handing down a ruling, they also throw in another ruling that they weren't asked about and they weren't given briefing on. And they throw in another ruling, and obiter dictum means that is not a precedent. That doesn't stand on its own 2 feet because they weren't given they didn't properly consider that to its fullest. So Rav Moshe handed down an obiter dictum that basically said, in saying that you could celebrate Thanksgiving, he mentioned that you could eat turkey, but he didn't really get into turkey. So the bottom line is, Rav Moshe later came back and said, we have a principle in Judaism. When the Orthodox community has established a minhag, a custom for generations, we are not allowed in a subsequent generation to say that prior generations of Orthodox Jews all were doing the wrong thing. Therefore, if there's any question about the turkey, we have to say, if 200 years of Orthodox Jews ate turkey and said a bracha on the turkey, we have to hold turkeys permitted. So bottom line, that's what you get for asking me whether Tachash is a badger. Are there any other questions, or no one else has to badger me tonight? Any other questions? Okay, what do we have? There's the eating crow expression from not knowing that crow was not kosher, but you ate it anyway, and later when you reverted to your attention that it was a mistake. So when you eat crow, because I'm not sure, I'm going to look up I'll look up how the idiom of eating crow came about. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here, and have a wonderful evening. Again, no class Thursday night, and as they say, may the best men win. Bye-bye.